Sloane dropped to her knees, the expensive fabric of her designer skirt pooling around her on the polished marble floor. She was hyperventilating, mascara-stained tears streaming down her carefully contoured face. Across the massive glass desk sat the mysterious multimillionaire creative director whose single signature on the contract was the absolute only thing that could save Sloane from total bankruptcy and career ruin. But as the powerful director slowly turned her leather chair around to face her, the air violently left Sloane's lungs. Her heart completely stopped. It wasn't a stranger. It was Odette, the weird, quiet girl from high school that Sloane had ruthlessly tormented, and sitting on the billionaire's desk, perfectly preserved and encased in a custom glass frame, was the exact same torn, ruined charcoal sketch that Sloane had maliciously ripped to shreds in front of the entire senior class 10 years ago. Odette picked up a heavy gold fountain pen, looked dead into Sloane's terrified, begging eyes, and smiled with cold, devastating authority. "You completely destroyed my masterpiece 10 years ago, Sloane," Odette said softly, her voice echoing in the silent, towering office. "Why on earth would you expect me to sign yours today?" Welcome back to Moments and Meanings. Before we uncover the shocking twist in today's story, take a quick moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below if you have ever proven your bullies wrong. High school can be a ruthless place in our superficial world. The people who are considered weird or different are often pushed down by those who desperately crave popularity, but the real world has a funny way of leveling the playing field. Today, we are diving into a deeply emotional story about an arrogant popular girl who destroyed the dreams of a quiet, artistic classmate just for a quick laugh. She thought she was entirely untouchable, but she had absolutely no idea that 10 years later, her entire future, her career, and her financial survival would depend completely on the signature of the very same girl she once humiliated. Get ready for a massive, devastating lesson in karma. Let's begin. The grand hallways of Ridgewood Academy were filled with the ultra-wealthy, but even among the elite, Sloane stood at the absolute top of the social hierarchy. She was 18, fiercely arrogant, and perfectly polished, wearing a custom-tailored designer blazer and expensive, sparkling diamond studs. She walked through the school as if she owned the very ground the other students walked on. For Sloane, high school wasn't about education. It was about status, power, and crushing anyone who didn't fit into her flawless, superficial aesthetic. Her current obsession was the prestigious Vanguard Creative Scholarship, a massive, fully funded grant that guaranteed the winner a spot at the top design university in the country. Sloane didn't actually need the scholarship money. Her father was a billionaire real estate mogul, but Sloane wanted the title. She wanted the glory and the social media praise. To secure her victory, Sloane had submitted a massive, soulless abstract painting. She had spent a fortune on imported Italian canvases and real gold leaf paints, but she had barely spent an hour actually painting it. It was flashy, expensive, and completely devoid of any real emotion or talent. But to Sloane, price tags equated to value. Sitting in the very back corner of the brightly lit senior art studio was Odette. Odette was the exact opposite of Sloane. She was quiet, humble, and practically invisible. She didn't wear designer labels. Instead, she wore faded, oversized thrift store sweaters covered in permanent paint stains, hiding her face behind a messy curtain of curly dark hair. She didn't have a wealthy father to buy her expensive supplies, so she worked exclusively with cheap sticks of raw charcoal and heavily textured, inexpensive sketch paper. To the popular crowd, Odette was just the weird girl who mumbled to herself while sketching in the courtyard. They laughed at her worn-out sneakers and her cheap, duct-taped backpack. But behind her quiet, awkward exterior, Odette possessed a breathtaking, once-in-a-generation artistic genius. It was the afternoon before the Vanguard Scholarship judging panel was set to arrive. Sloane strutted into the art studio, flanked by her toxic, equally arrogant best friend, Blair. They sipped iced coffees, loudly mocking the other students' projects. "Look at these pathetic attempts, Blair," Sloane scoffed, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing the edge of her own gold leaf canvas. "It's honestly insulting that they even let the regular scholarship students compete against me. My piece screams luxury. It's obviously going to win." "Obviously," Blair giggled cruelly, adjusting her designer sunglasses indoors. "Money buys taste, Sloane. The rest of these losers don't stand a chance," as Sloane turned to admire her reflection. In the studio window, her eyes landed on Odette in the back corner. Odette was hunched over her desk, entirely absorbed in her work, her hands completely black with charcoal dust. Curiosity, mixed with a deep toxic need to assert her dominance, pulled Sloane across the room. She marched over to Odette's desk, her expensive heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. "What on earth are you doing, weirdo?" Sloane sneered, looking down her nose. "Are you just rubbing dirt on a piece of paper?" Odette flinched, instinctively pulling her arms over her artwork to hide it. I'm finishing my submission for the Vanguard scholarship," she stammered softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, Sloane, just leave me alone. Submission." Sloane laughed loudly, a sharp, ugly sound that made the other students in the room turn and look. "You? Competing against me? Let me see this absolute disaster," before Odette could stop. Sloane aggressively snatched the heavy piece of sketch paper off the desk. But as Sloane held the drawing up to the light, her arrogant smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a profound, hyper-realistic masterpiece. Using nothing but a $2 stick of charcoal, Odette had drawn a breathtaking portrait of a woman breaking free from heavy, tangled chains. The shading was immaculate, the emotion was raw and deeply moving, and the eyes of the woman in the drawing seemed to stare right into the soul. It possessed more talent, depth, and sheer genius than Sloane's expensive gold leaf painting could ever hope to achieve. Deep down, in the dark, insecure depths of her mind, Sloane instantly knew that Odette's drawing was going to win the competition. But Sloane's ego was far too massive to ever admit that a girl in a thrift store sweater was better than her. Instead of recognizing the immense value of the art, Sloane chose to attack the artist. "Oh, wow," Sloane said, her voice dripping with venomous sarcasm as she held the masterpiece by the corner. "Charcoal. How incredibly cheap and pathetic. It looks like a giant smudge. Do you honestly think the Vanguard judges are going to give a fully funded scholarship to a weird, smelly girl using dollar store art supplies?" "It's about the emotion," Odette whispered, tears welling in her eyes as she reached her charcoal-stained hands out to get her drawing back. "It's about what it means. Please, give it back. I've worked on that for 3 months, 3 months." Blair mocked from the side, rolling her eyes. "You spent 3 months on a dirty piece of paper? How embarrassing." Sloane looked at the breathtaking drawing, then looked at Odette's faded clothes and stained hands. She didn't see a genius, she only saw a threat to her perfect, superficial image, and Sloane had a strict rule. If she couldn't buy her way to the top, she would tear down anyone who stood in her way. The setup for the ultimate betrayal had begun. The tension in the brightly lit senior art studio was suffocating. Sloane stood perfectly still, dangling Odette's breathtaking charcoal masterpiece by its corner. Deep down, beneath her designer clothes and massive ego, Sloane felt a violently cold spike of insecurity. She knew with absolute certainty that if the Vanguard scholarship judges saw this drawing tomorrow, her expensive, soulless gold leaf painting would instantly be disqualified. Odette took a desperate step forward, her charcoal-stained hands trembling. "Sloane, please," Odette begged, her voice cracking with raw emotion. "The judging panel is tomorrow morning. I don't have time to start over. That scholarship is my only chance to go to college. Please give it back to me." For a fleeting, microscopic second, Sloane hesitated. The rational human part of her brain knew that destroying another person's future over a high school art contest was purely evil. But then Blair leaned in, whispering toxic poison directly into Sloane's ear. "You know the judges love a pathetic sob story," Sloane, Blair muttered maliciously, glaring at Odette's faded thrift store sweater. "If they see this, they might actually pick her out of pity. Imagine how humiliating it would be for you, the daughter of a billionaire, to lose to the weird girl who talks to herself. Your reputation would be entirely ruined." That was it, the absolute point of no return. Sloane's fragile ego could not handle the idea of being second best to someone she deemed beneath her. She made the conscious, devastating choice to protect her superficial status at the expense of another human being's entire future. "You're right, Blair," Sloane said, a cruel, wicked smile spreading across her perfectly contoured face. "We really shouldn't let this garbage clutter up the exhibition space. It's an insult to real artists." "Sloane, no." Odette cried out, lunging forward to grab her artwork, but she was too late. Sloane gripped the top edge of the thick sketch paper with both of her manicured hands. She looked Odette dead in the eyes, her gaze completely void of empathy, and violently pulled her hands apart. Rip, the loud, agonizing sound of the thick paper tearing in half echoed through the dead-silent studio. Odette let out a breathless, heartbroken gasp, freezing in her tracks as if she had just been physically struck. But Sloane wasn't finished. With a sick, triumphant laugh, she placed the two halves together and ripped them again and again. She maliciously shredded the breathtaking portrait of the woman breaking free from chains until it was nothing more than a handful of jagged, ruined scraps. Oops, Sloane sneered mockingly, opening her hands and letting the torn pieces flutter down onto the hardwood floor like dirty confetti. My drawing, Odette whimpered, her voice entirely shattered. She dropped to her knees right there in the middle of the classroom, her curly hair falling over her face as she frantically tried to push the torn pieces back together with her trembling, black-stained fingers. Tears streamed down her cheeks, dropping onto the floor. 3 months. It took me 3 months. The rest of the students in the class either watched in shocked, uncomfortable silence or giggled nervously, too terrified of Sloane's popularity to step in and help. Sloane looked down at the weeping girl on the floor. Instead of feeling guilty, she felt a massive surge of arrogant power, but she wanted to ensure that Odette's spirit was entirely broken. "Oh, don't cry, weirdo," Sloane laughed cruelly. She lifted her large plastic cup of iced coffee, popped the lid off, and casually tilted it forward. The freezing brown liquid and heavy ice cubes splashed directly onto the floor, completely soaking into the torn scraps of charcoal paper, ruining them forever. The coffee splashed onto Odette's worn-out sneakers and stained the knees of her jeans. "There," Sloane said, stepping over the puddle with her expensive designer heels. "Now your art truly represents who you are, Odette. A messy, pathetic, worthless failure. Next time, leave the winning to the people who actually matter." Blair let out a loud, piercing laugh, linking her arm through Sloane's. "Come on, Sloane. It smells like cheap desperation in here. Let's go to the mall." Sloane strutted out of the art studio, her head held high, entirely convinced that she had just secured her ultimate victory. She had crushed her competition, protected her flawless aesthetic, and proven her dominance. But back in the studio, kneeling in the puddle of spilled coffee and ruined dreams, Odette did not throw the scraps away. Sobbing quietly, Odette carefully peeled the soaked, torn pieces of her masterpiece off the floor, holding them gently against her chest as if they were fragile glass. She didn't fight back and she didn't scream, but in her tear-filled eyes, a powerful, unbreakable fire ignited. Sloane thought she had destroyed Odette's future, but all she had really done was set the stage for her own devastating downfall. The universe had witnessed the ultimate betrayal, and karma was incredibly patient. 10 years is a very long time. For those who work hard and stay humble, a decade can be the foundation of a beautiful, fulfilling life. But for those who build their entire existence on a fragile foundation of arrogance, daddy's money, and cruelty, 10 years is more than enough time for the universe to completely dismantle everything they hold dear. For Sloane, the karma was slow, agonizing, and flawlessly poetic. She had actually won the Vanguard Creative Scholarship 10 years ago, exactly as she had planned. The judges had been blinded by the sheer expense of her gold leaf canvas, but the victory was incredibly short-lived. Once she arrived at the prestigious design university, she was immediately exposed. The professors quickly realized that Sloane had absolutely no original ideas, no passion, and no actual artistic talent. She flunked out by the end of her sophomore year, laughing it off because she believed her father's billionaire real estate empire would always act as her safety net. But 3 years later, the safety net violently snapped. Her father's massive company was investigated by federal authorities for gross financial fraud and embezzlement. The empire collapsed overnight. Her father fled the country, leaving Sloane behind as the bank aggressively seized her trust funds, her luxury sports cars, and her family's sprawling estate. The moment the money evaporated, so did Sloane's perfect, superficial world. Blair, her toxic best friend who had encouraged her to destroy Odette's artwork, was the very first person to block Sloane's phone number. Without a trust fund to pay for VIP tables and private jets, Sloane's high society friends entirely erased her from existence. She was suddenly completely alone. Desperate to maintain the illusion of wealth, Sloane had taken out massive, high-interest loans to start her own interior design firm, Sloane Looks, but without actual talent, her firm was a catastrophic failure. She relied on flashy, expensive trends, alienating clients who wanted genuine artistry. Now, 10 years after that fateful day in the high school art studio, Sloane sat in a cramped, windowless rented office, staring at a massive stack of red final notice bills. She was completely destitute. She was 2 months behind on her rent, her business accounts were overdrawn by $50,000, and her creditors were threatening to take her to court by the end of the week. If she didn't find a miracle immediately, she was going to be forced to declare bankruptcy and move into a homeless shelter. But just as she was about to bury her face in her hands and weep, her computer chimed with a high-priority email. Sloane clicked it open, her tired eyes widening in absolute, breathless disbelief. It was an official correspondence from Elysian, the most prestigious, exclusive, and immensely wealthy creative design agency in the entire country. The email stated that Elysian's elusive founder and multimillionaire creative director was looking to acquire a smaller, failing design firm for a tax write-off. They were offering to buy Sloane looks for $2 million. $2 million. It was the ultimate lifeline. It was enough to pay off all her massive debts, save her from bankruptcy, and put her right back into the luxury lifestyle she desperately craved. All she needed was for the mysterious creative director to sign the acquisition contract in person this afternoon. Sloane's arrogant ego instantly reignited like a wildfire. "I knew it," she whispered to herself, a toxic, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. "I am still Sloane. I am still a winner." She immediately took her last working credit card, maxed it out entirely, and bought a pristine, white designer skirt and a silk blouse. She spent 2 hours doing her makeup, meticulously contouring her face to hide the deep, exhausted bags under her eyes. She wanted to walk into that meeting projecting absolute power and flawless luxury. An hour later, Sloane stood outside the towering, glass-walled skyscraper that served as Elysian's global headquarters. She took a deep breath, clutching the thick acquisition contract tightly against her chest, and marched through the revolving doors. She strutted through the magnificent, sunlit lobby as if she already owned the building, entirely ignoring the receptionist as she stepped into the private VIP elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse floor as the elevator rapidly ascended. Sloane practiced her pitch. She was going to use her classic, superficial charm. She would flatter the director, pretend her firm was incredibly successful but looking for new horizons, and secure that $2 million signature. Ding. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the entire top floor. It was breathtaking. The floors were polished black marble, and the walls were lined with custom glass displays. As Sloane walked confidently down the quiet, silent hallway toward the main office, she didn't even bother to look closely at the art hanging on the walls. If she had, she would have noticed a chilling detail. Every single multi-million-dollar masterpiece proudly displayed in the corporate headquarters was drawn entirely with raw black charcoal. Sloane reached the heavy glass doors of the creative director's office. She pushed them open, stepping into a massive room overlooking the entire city skyline. Sitting behind a massive, sleek glass desk was the creative director. The imposing leather executive chair was turned entirely around, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows. The director didn't speak, but the sheer, undeniable aura of extreme wealth and power radiating from the chair made Sloane's heart flutter. With nervous anticipation, "Good afternoon," Sloane said loudly, projecting her fake, arrogant confidence as she walked up to the desk. "I am Sloane. I brought the acquisition contract for Sloane Looks. I must say, your offices are almost as elegant as my own. I think this merger will be incredibly beneficial for both of us." Sloane placed the thick paper contract onto the polished glass desk. She pulled out a heavy gold pen and tapped it confidently against the dotted line. "I just need your signature." "Right here," Sloane smiled, "and we can finalize this brilliant partnership." The towering office remained suffocatingly silent for a long, agonizing moment. The rain outside began to patter against the massive glass windows. Then the creative director finally spoke. "Partnership." A soft, yet devastatingly powerful woman's voice echoed from the back of the leather chair. "You haven't changed a single bit, Sloane. You still think you can just buy your way out of your own failures." Sloane's arrogant smile instantly froze. Her blood ran completely cold. That voice, it sounded impossibly familiar, pulling at a deeply buried, 10-year-old memory. Slowly, agonizingly, the heavy leather chair rotated around, and the reality that Sloane stepped into was a perfectly orchestrated, devastating trap. The heavy leather executive chair completed its rotation, stopping perfectly in the center of the massive glass desk. Sloane's arrogant, confident smile completely shattered, falling from her face as if it were made of fragile glass. The air violently left her lungs. Her meticulously contoured face turned as pale as a ghost. Sitting in the chair was not a stranger. It was Odette, but this was not the quiet, weird girl who hid behind a messy curtain of hair in stained, oversized thrift store sweaters. This woman was breathtaking. Odette was wearing a flawless, custom-tailored burgundy silk power suit. Her dark, curly hair was elegantly styled, framing a face that radiated an immense, unshakable confidence and profound authority. She wore no heavy, flashy jewelry, yet she projected more wealth and power in a single glance than Sloane had ever possessed in her entire life. Sloane's hand began to tremble violently. The heavy gold pen she had been holding slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the polished glass desk. "Odette?" Sloane gasped, her voice barely a choked whisper, completely stripped of its usual arrogance. You are the founder of Elysian?" Odette didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly leaned forward, her piercing eyes locking directly onto Sloane's terrified face. She reached out and pressed a small silver button on her desk. A soft, warm spotlight illuminated a custom, thick glass display case resting right on the corner of the desk. Sloane's eyes slowly drifted toward the display. When she saw what was inside, her knees completely buckled. Perfectly preserved beneath the thick, museum-quality glass was a charcoal drawing on heavy sketch paper. It was the breathtaking portrait of the woman breaking free from chains, but it wasn't whole. It was violently torn into dozens of jagged pieces, painstakingly taped back together from the back. The edges of the paper were warped, heavily stained with dark, dried brown spots from a spilled iced coffee. It was the exact same masterpiece Sloane had maliciously destroyed 10 years ago. "I kept it," Odette said softly, her voice carrying a calm, devastating weight. "Every single torn piece, every coffee-stained scrap. I stayed in that art studio until midnight that day, taping my future back together while you went to the mall to celebrate my destruction." Sloane stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the plush carpet. But it was ruined," she stammered, her mind violently short-circuiting as the crushing reality of the situation closed in around her. "You couldn't have submitted that to the Vanguard judges." "I didn't," Odette replied coldly. "I knew the Vanguard panel wanted flawless, expensive presentations. So I took my ruined, coffee-stained drawing to a different foundation, one that valued raw emotion and resilience over superficial price tags. When they saw what had been done to my artwork, and the meticulous care I took to salvage it, they didn't just give me a scholarship, they gave me a full, unrestricted grant to start my own design agency." Odette stood up, her presence dominating the massive office. "I built this entire multi-million-dollar empire on raw charcoal and pure emotion, Sloane. I built it on the very things you called cheap and pathetic, and now, 10 years later, you are standing in my building, wearing clothes you bought on a maxed-out credit card, begging me for a tax write-off to save you from complete bankruptcy." Panic, raw, unfiltered, suffocating panic violently seized Sloane's chest. The realization that her absolute survival rested entirely in the hands of the girl she had mercilessly bullied was too much to bear. She had walked directly into Odette's perfectly orchestrated trap. Elysian didn't need a failing firm like Sloane looks. Odette had brought her here specifically to deliver this reckoning. Sloane dropped to her knees, the expensive fabric of her designer skirt pooling around her on the polished black marble floor. She began hyperventilating, mascara-stained tears streaming down her carefully contoured face, entirely ruining the perfect, wealthy aesthetic she had spent hours crafting. "Odette, please." Sloane shrieked, pressing her trembling hands against the edge of the glass desk. "You have to understand. I was a stupid kid. I was insecure. Blair was manipulating me. She put the idea in my head. I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm so sorry. Please, I have absolutely nothing left. The bank is going to take my apartment. If you don't sign this acquisition contract, I am going to be homeless." Odette looked down at the weeping, desperate woman kneeling on her floor. There was absolutely no anger in her eyes. There was only a cold, profound pity. Odette picked up the heavy gold fountain pen Sloane had dropped. She looked dead into Sloane's terrified, begging eyes and smiled with cold, devastating authority. You completely destroyed my masterpiece 10 years ago, Sloane, Odette said softly, her voice echoing in the silent, towering office. Why on earth would you expect me to sign yours today? No. Please. Sloane wailed, reaching out to grab the edge of the contract, but Odette calmly moved the acquisition paperwork out of Sloane's reach. With a deliberate, agonizingly slow motion, Odette gripped the top edge of Sloane's contract with both hands. Rip! The sound of the thick legal paper tearing in half echoed through the office, sounding exactly like the charcoal sketch. Tearing 10 years prior, Odette placed the halves together and ripped them again and again. She shredded Sloane's $2 million lifeline into jagged, worthless scraps, letting them flutter down onto the floor, landing directly on Sloane's pristine white designer skirt. Oops, Odette said smoothly, throwing the exact same cruel word back into Sloane's face. Your firm is completely worthless to me, Sloane. My empire has absolutely no room for fake artists. Sloane knelt on the polished black marble floor. Her mind completely shattered, trembling violently, she frantically scrambled to gather the jagged, shredded pieces of her $2 million contract. Her mascara-stained tears dropped onto the shredded paper, smudging the ink just as her spilled. Iced coffee had ruined Odette's charcoal masterpiece 10 years prior. Please, Sloane wept, her voice a pathetic, broken whimper as she tried to press the torn pieces of the contract together on her lap. Please, Odette, I can tape it back together, I can fix it. Just give me another chance. I have nowhere else to go. Odette stood tall behind her massive glass desk, her expression completely unmovable. She felt no joy in seeing Sloane reduced to this pathetic state, but she also felt absolutely no obligation to save a woman who had built her entire life on cruelty and arrogance. You can't tape a shattered ego back together, Sloane, Odette said calmly. She reached out and pressed a button on her sleek silver intercom. Security, please come to my office. Miss Sloane's meeting has concluded, and she is ready to be escorted out. No. Wait. Sloane wailed, clutching the handful of shredded paper against her chest as the heavy glass doors swung open, too massive. Security guards in immaculate black suits stepped into the office. They didn't say a word as they firmly gripped Sloane by the arms, lifting her off the floor. Sloane kicked and screamed, entirely abandoning her wealthy, high society aesthetic as she begged for mercy, but it was entirely useless. Odette turned her back on the screaming woman, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline she now owned. She listened as Sloane's hysterical cries echoed down the silent marble hallway, eventually fading away completely as the heavy elevator doors sealed shut. When the elevator reached the ground floor, Sloane was forcefully marched through the magnificent sunlit lobby. The receptionist and the agency's top executives watched in stunned silence as the once arrogant designer was shoved out the revolving glass doors. Sloane stumbled onto the hard concrete of the city sidewalk just as a torrential downpour began. In seconds, her pristine white designer skirt and silk blouse were completely soaked, clinging to her freezing skin. She looked down at her hands, still clutching the worthless, shredded pieces of her contract. Her $2 million lifeline was gone forever, and with it, her entire superficial world, the bright, fluorescent lights of bargain craft and hobby. A discount art supply store in a low-income strip mall, flickered with a dull, annoying hum. Standing behind the metal cash register was Sloane. She was no longer wearing custom-tailored designer blazers or expensive diamond studs. Her hair was pulled back into a messy, frizzy ponytail, and she was wearing a stiff, heavily stained red polyester employee vest over a faded t-shirt. Her perfectly manicured nails were completely gone, replaced by chipped, unkempt fingernails. Damaged by stocking heavy cardboard boxes of cheap paint. Since her firm officially went bankrupt, Sloane's luxury apartment had been foreclosed, and her car had been repossessed. She was currently living in a tiny, cramped studio apartment on the absolute worst side of town, forced to work 50 hours a week minimum wage just to afford groceries. The bell above the discount store door chimed. A young, quiet teenage girl in a faded, oversized sweater walked up to the register. She gently placed a single $2 stick of raw black charcoal and a cheap pad of sketch paper onto the counter. Sloane stared at the charcoal. A heavy, suffocating wave of profound regret violently slammed into her chest. She slowly scanned the barcode, her eyes hollowing out with misery. That will be $4.50, Sloane mumbled, her voice entirely devoid of life. As the teenager handed over a crumpled $5 bill, Sloane looked out the dusty front window of the store. Across the street, plastered on a massive, glowing digital billboard, was a breathtaking advertisement for the Elysian Foundation Gala. The billboard featured a stunning, high-definition photograph of Odette. She looked incredibly radiant, wearing a brilliant evening gown, smiling brightly next to a handsome, kind-eyed man named Silas, the incredibly supportive gallery curator who had believed in Odette from the very beginning and was now her devoted husband. Together, they were announcing a new $10 million scholarship fund explicitly designed to provide fully funded college tuitions and elite art supplies to underprivileged youth. Odette had used her immense wealth to elevate the very people Sloane used to mock. She was changing the world, deeply loved by a man who valued her raw, authentic soul, and surrounded by a massive community that respected her genius. Sloane handed the teenager her 50 cents in change. She watched the young artist walk out of the store, clutching her cheap charcoal like it was the most valuable treasure in the world. A single, bitter tear slipped down Sloane's exhausted face. For the first time in her entire life, Sloane finally understood the truth. True value wasn't found in a gold leaf canvas, an expensive price tag, or a massive bank account. True value was found in passion, resilience, and human kindness. But it was a lesson she had learned far too late, and she would spend the rest of her life paying the price for her ultimate betrayal. The meaning every moment has a meaning. But not every truth is easy to face. When we tear others down simply to inflate our own fragile egos, we don't destroy their potential, we only destroy our own humanity. True talent and genuine worth can never be determined by the brand of clothes someone wears or the price of the tools they use. Resilience will always outshine arrogance, and karma will always collect its debts in the end. If this lesson resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe. Comment "Karma is real" below if you believe that treating people with kindness is always more important than popularity or money. This is Moments and Meanings by Anne, and I'll see you in the next story.